So, we're in Ottawa on the English side now. We're not in Gatineau. We were in Gatineau.
We were in Hull, which is
Ool.
part of Gatineau.
So I got my buddy Roger here, and you've been living in Ottawa for
10 weeks.
10 weeks.
It is Friday, November 16th, and I got here on Friday, or Saturday, I guess, September 9th. And I've been back on the weekends, but I've been here every week since then. 2 months, a little over 2 months.
What are you doing here for all our listeners?
I am working for the government, federal government of Canada, and I am a law student in Toronto. And the work I'm doing here is an internship through the school I go to for credit. So I'm not getting paid, but I get credit for the whole semester. Rather than taking classes, basically I'm doing this instead. And it's the Department of Canadian Heritage, which is tasked with setting policies that will seek to protect and promote, the creations of Canadians. So it's a department that advocates for artists and protects their rights and tries to develop an arts policy that helps artists both have their rights protected and also be able to make a living somehow.
So are you in like a good transitional period? It was there less attention to this under the Harper government as opposed now into the Trudeau government, or is this the way it's always been?
It's the way it's always been. So, but the Harper government had a very different policy. Like the sort of the big pet project they made during their administration was the 2013 Copyright Act of reform.
Okay.
And that was a whole thing. There were a bunch of weird things that went into that were really intense. Like Canada now has the harshest penalties for basically ripping a DVD or like breaking it anytime you break a digital lock on something.
Really?
They call it digital lock, so they call it TPMs, technological protection measures. Basically, anytime a digital file is in any way encoded in a way that's suggested that you're required to unlock it in order to watch it.
Is that
if you break that lock, it can be like jail time in Canada.
Is that like illegal streaming?
No, not streaming. Because, well, I mean, I guess if the stream was in some way encoded,
an illegal NBA or NHL stream or something, or
yeah, the law focuses on the presence of some kind of a protection measure. So there has to be something that you hack through to get to.
Yes. Okay.
If you're just going to a URL for a website where they're hosting
they're providing
illegal stream, that's on them. That's something else.
Yeah.
Which is also illegal. But anyways, I would just bring that up because the Harper government reformed the Copyright Act in 2013 and put in some really, and the justification was to update our laws around that because they hadn't been updated in a long time.
Yeah.
But one of the things they did is they put in these really intense penalties.
Did that coincide with like the new digital era? Is that like something they had to reform? Just because everything was changing?
The overall reform is to respond to the new digital era. But when did that come in? Right, probably this was 2013.
Yeah.
I think the last time the Copyright Act had been updated was 1997.
Wow.
So
before
a lot
the
had
internet.
changed. Exactly right. The dawn of the internet. So, there had to be an update. But anyways, bringing that up because it's an example of just some really extreme stuff that was in there. But no, this is the way it works is like I specifically work with copyright mostly just because that's what I'm studying at law school, and I told the prof who runs this program like, look, I'm interested in copyright. So she said, oh, okay, I'll send you to Heritage because they do copyright. So there's two departments that handle copyright: Department of Canadian Heritage and Department of Innovation, Science and Economic Development. And it's basically, and most governments will have two offices to handle copyright because copyright philosophically is based upon the rights of the author and the rights of the publisher.
Yeah.
Or the public. So you have generally it's a balance. You have one department advocating on behalf of the author, which is what heritage is.
Yeah.
And you have innovation, science, and economic development, which is advocating for the publisher, for the listener, the viewer,
To share
the audience, right?
To share their
Yeah. So innovation, science, economic development, which is called ISED. It's a ISED. It's a long.
That's hilarious.
It's a long word, so I just call it ISED. ISED's job when it comes to copyright is to advocate on behalf of the user of the work, right?
Yeah.
What do consumers want? What do publishers want? What do broadcast networks want? And heritage will ask, what do musicians, authors, painters, screenwriters, filmmakers, anyone who's in a creative role, will ask what do they want, and the tension between those two departments will hopefully create a copyright policy that sort of respects both.
Cool.
You guys have to negotiate, so that's how it works. And most like the UK and the US function in a similar way.
Yeah. Australia as well, or no?
Yeah, Australia. Sure. Yeah. New Zealand, all the common law countries.
Yeah. Well, Roger is not only studying law, he's a bandmate of mine. He was a key contributor to the Bad Meat LP with keyboard and guitar contributions. And we met through the financial sector, basically.
Yeah, weirdly. Although I feel like we really met in music.
Connected through music, but we just
But we initially
met at the TD Bank you were working, and then we met at the Painted Lady, which is a renowned open mic sanctuary in Toronto now.
West side of Toronto.
And it was the night Bowie died.
It was.
And it was
like January probably January 2015 or something like that.
I was like, yeah. You like
January,
music?
February.
I like music.
Yeah.
Let's do this. Yeah, no, it was because I was looking to finish off my album and put some, unique sounds on it. And you had a good, unique style. I liked it.
Yeah, we had some good sessions of that to come up with.
And we're both naturally Floyd fans. It's just
absolutely
worked out nice. And yeah, so Roger and I have jammed in Paris together, which was an interesting bar.
Jammed is really talking it up. I think there was a.
No, we did a set.
Did you a set? But there was like a weird like acoustic guitar that was kind of.
It was more of the do it yourself.
It was very much.
It was the more do it yourself open mics that I've ever seen anywhere.
Like I don't think
ever.
It was bizarre.
There was zero organization.
There was like a 4-track mixer, and there was a nylon string guitar. That looked like it had been like used in construction or
centuries
something.
ago by Napoleon or something.
It was messed up, man.
And we were like, who's in charge here? Is like, that guy over there. And he's like, well, if you want to take a run at that mixer, go ahead. And then so you set it up basically, and you started the night. And then that like woke up I was like, oh yeah, I play music too. And some of the people woke up in the bar and came over and played a bit. And then you and I did a couple of acoustic renditions of my songs, which was fun. It was really good. And we got wrecked. It was a good night.
Yeah, it was cool.
And then a cabbie took me home, and I gave him a CD, and he enthusiastically like pulled off the cellophane and threw it in the CD player and just cranked the shit out of it. All windows down, sunroof down, 1:30 in the morning through the streets of Paris, just blaring.
That's a pretty great way to have your album heard.
Focus, free to choose, It was a good moment.
Yeah, that's pretty great.
And then we played, so we traveled a bit together. We've done a couple shows in Montreal, which was fun. We played in Bar Dive, which is fun.
Yes. Yeah, that's right.
And in Ottawa here the other night for my first show in Ottawa and getting that cherry popped. It's been a good run this year, little cross country. seeing
Yeah, I
the
mean, you've been
cities.
all over the place in terms of touring. I'd probably join you on two places, but
Wow, if I
you've been
could
all
take
over
you,
the place.
brother, if I had the expenses, we'd be all aboard
Mm-hmm.
eventually. So yeah, let's talk about this thing called what the hell is it? Audium. So they're tracking revenue for YouTube, basically.
Talking about audio, you said?
Audium, it's called. It's a
Audium.
new
Oh, okay.
company called
Yeah.
Audium, and it's a North American-based company for
Okay.
artists. And I think what they're kind of doing is they're being a service that's taking care of the monetization of YouTube.
Right.
So YouTube has changed their standards, and their higher standards now. So apparently you need, I know I'm not 100% what the numbers are, but you need something like 4,000 hours viewed and 10,000 subscribers or something
To get what?
to be eligible for monetization.
For like royalties, yeah.
Yeah, for royalties and stuff like that. So you need,
Sure, because they don't want to. They need to have a minimum so that the cost of paying the royalty is at least as much as the value of the royalty.
Well, what I noticed too was being my own like promoter online and stuff like that, is that countries with the big volumes online, like India, China's not really online too, so they don't have a huge impact on social media. But countries like India, where they just jack lots of footage and put it on their own channel as their own channel,
Yeah, sure.
and then they get thousands of views and subscribers and stuff like that, and get monetization money, right? So there's a whole underlying black market backdoor revenue area from YouTube as well, right? So I think they're trying to cut a lot of that out.
Yeah, well, and I think a lot of the content providers on the big social media content sites are having to rethink the way they do things, because traditionally they're treated as in Canada we call it like safe harbor, but like the idea that like if you're like an internet provider, a telecom, or if you're a major social media content company, you're basically exempted from regulation in Canada and in most Western countries.
What do you mean, like CRTC regulations, like
specifically
35% Canadian content and rules like
if
that?
so CRTC is telecom and broadcasting. They're two separate.
So how does that work?
sides.
Because like
They're two separate laws.
YouTube's a California-based company, so it's an American company. So because I'm under the impression that you make money off YouTube, you have to fill out a T4, a U.S. form. Like you're paying U.S. taxes if you're making money off YouTube.
I don't know the answer to that actually. Yeah, I don't know. That's the financial.
I think
side.
you do.
Yeah, I mean, it's probably a minimum you have to make. You probably if you like made $100, $500, you probably have to report it. There's a minimum you probably have to report, but
10.
Yeah, technically, especially if it's enough. If well, I don't know, because like I don't know, you're not an employee of YouTube getting paid by them. You're a contractor. You get a deal with them.
Yeah,
they're paying you as a contractor. Yeah, I guess there's a certain point where the government's gonna want to know transactions happening. But what I'm talking more for is internet service providers and online social media sites were both basically given these exemptions from regulations back in 1999, so a long time ago now, and they've never been lifted since. And the idea was that you shouldn't subject internet service providers to the same rules you subject the phone companies to, because internet service providers are a new thing and they're a fledgling business and they're just getting off their feet, and we shouldn't impose a lot of regulation on them now because we don't want to slow down their growth. But since then, all of the phone companies are now internet. There's no more phone company. They're internet. Rogers is.
It's all internet.
Is all internet. And a data.
Nobody
data
talks
plans.
on the fucking phone.
Yeah, and so Rogers, Bell, and Telus, like what they do now primarily, is they provide internet services. But internet services, the provision of that is not to a great extent, it's not as regulated as other.
So they can sneak in a lot of costs and.
Yeah, I mean, there's stuff like net neutrality, for example, where like if you're going to be an internet service provider, you can't filter anything. You have to give someone you have to be neutral in providing access to the internet.
That's so like cutting off.
Rogers can't block access to Telus and Bell because it's their competitors, right?
It's like cutting off certain newspapers.
Yeah, you can't edit the internet for
wow.
That's net neutrality. The FCC in the States just repealed net neutrality last year. Jeez. So now in the States, technically, like Verizon or Sprint, the big telecoms there could give. Well, I think the idea, the way they think of it is, you could, because when there's no neutrality, like Verizon say could partner with Netflix, and you could say subscribe to Verizon and get Netflix for free.
Dictate their own.
Yeah, like they do it. So it's like you'll get special access to Netflix as a Verizon, but then maybe they say under our plan you can't access Amazon Prime or HBO.
So eventually,
it's any of Netflix's competitors.
Pay classes of internet.
So yeah, the problem.
So it's like the poor people get the basic internet.
Yeah,
the middle class get packages,
pay to access,
and the real rich people get all the internet.
Become like a cable.
Yeah.
Something, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's the concern that people have about it. But yeah, the CRTC, annually like reaffirms their support for the policy.
So we'll go back to this content that you have to provide, the 35% content. Now is that still under the old umbrella of like television and radio, or now has that carried over to internet and like I don't even know how you regulate that or satellite radio and shit.
So just like the internet, the ISPs are exempted from regulation under the Telecommunications Act, the CRTC is also exempted online content providers. Shit. They call them over-the-top services for some reason, OTTs.
Okay.
That's like the league technical term for them. They are exempted from the Broadcasting Act, so the other piece of legislation that the CRTC is in charge of. So the Broadcasting Act has this. I wrote like a whole research project in my second year of law school on the Broadcasting Act. It's bizarre. It's got Section 3 of the Act is like, when you go sub A and then B, C.
Yeah.
So it has A through T.
What the fuck?
That's how long the list is.
Jeez.
That's Section 3.1, sub A through T. And it's Canada's broadcasting policy. And it's like, what's that? A through T is what, like 20 points?
20 letters, yeah.
20 letters. So that's 20 different things that you have to do. If you're a regulated broadcaster, you have to satisfy 20 requirements. But a lot of them are very like esoteric requirements. They'll be like, you must under Section 3 sub 1, K. It's like support Canadian culture. And
yeah.
What the hell does that mean?
I've seen enough of this working. There's a lot of that,
and things like support Canadian Indigenous culture.
Yeah.
And give and don't give prioritize one area or another. Like try to give as much exposure to all of Canada, and then contribute money to the Canada Media Fund.
Yeah.
Right. All regulated broadcasters in Canada have to pay into a fund that's then used to produce Canadian content.
Yeah.
There's all of these things.
Award shows and shit.
Yeah.
And,
all of these things where they're looking for really lucrative productions too. I mean, hopefully lucrative. And the vast majority aren't. And then there's a couple of really big shows.
Yeah.
And they're trying to get
the mic to.
They're trying to.
Sorry.
They're trying to divert money towards CanCon and make sure
Canadian.
What is being produced So it goes back to there's a whole history you can get into on this, like starting with the radio. Radio is when it started. There's a Royal Commission on Broadcasting in the late 1920s in Canada, where they talk about like the delicate minds of the Canadian youth. And they go on and on about how,
yeah.
like, because in the 20s, they were concerned that, like, all of these radio stations coming out of New York and, like, Buffalo, all of, the young Canadians would just listen to American radio if there was no regulation, because they would outcompete the Canadian stations. And then our young people would be growing up, and they'd just be listening. They'd be listening to a foreign power their whole life, like watching American TV now, right?
Yeah.
So that was the beginning of CAN kind of saying, well, maybe we need to protect our own industry, right, and keep the Americans at the door, so that there are Canadian voices, talking to Canadians, and Canadians have a Canadian voice they can listen to, and that being important. And that's the underlying, and as long as that's a concern, I think CanCon in some form will always be here.
Was almost the idea of CBC.
Yeah, it's part of it. The CBC was founded in the 30s.
Yeah, so the idea, it was almost formulated out of the idea into CBC and what it is.
And the last third of the Broadcasting Act is just the CBC. Like the CBC is created as part of the Broadcasting Act.
What you have to require those fulfillments.
The whole organization is laid out in like the last third of the Broadcasting Act.
Well, it's important for each country to set that aside.
Mm-hmm.
And
absolutely have a national broadcaster.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And there's some countries that just nothing but government controlled national broadcasters. My friend went to Sudan actually.
Sure. Yeah.
And lived and got a job
Khartoum?
in just doing news for the local news, and he said there's just like 2 government-based channels that run the whole country.
Sure.
That's it.
Yeah, I mean, it takes a lot of like private money
to
launch a private broadcasting network. Like that's a very heavy investment.
Yeah, exactly. You have to be like financially well off as an individual, and like I guess Rogers and Ted Rogers, they built their whole foundation off of kind of like community-based events and stuff like that, and it was all volunteer based too.
He owned a bunch of radio stations, right?
Yeah, exactly.
In Toronto.
Yeah, and then there was a lot of investments made when a lot of things went under, like other companies, radio stations.
He was able to buy up infrastructure, networks and stuff.
Yeah, exactly.
Sure.
And they basically have the infrastructure. They have like all the original cable lines that got inverted into fiber and changed into fiber,
and their argument has always been, we invested in building the Canadian infrastructure. It costed us a lot of money, so we should be entitled to charge people $100 a month for a cell phone.
Yeah. So can we take a break? And are you cool? Are you able to talk about that case that?
Oh, yeah, I'd love to talk about it. Yeah, absolutely.
That you hung out with?
Yeah, no, it was a Supreme Court case that's open to the public.
All right, we're going to talk about that next. Focus podcast number 9. We're at 9 already with my buddy Roger Angus. We'll be right back after this.
You're listening to the Focus podcast.
Fucking hilarious. And we
specifically Tom Goes to the Mayor.
Pre Tim and Eric show.
Or just one of the, I think the first show that they did like professionally for a network.
Was it like a few episodes? Was it like a pilot series?
There were like 2 or 3 seasons. But each episode's only like 12 minutes long.
Yeah.
Because it's like Adult Swim.
Yeah.
Right? So it's all like really short episodes.
Do you ever see the very, very first episodes of Trailer Park Boys? It was just Ricky and Julian, the characters.
I don't think I ever saw.
And it was like in a bad kind of shutter. and it was black and white, and it was funny, but it wasn't that funny.
It's kind of, they were doing a low budget when they
Yeah,
started.
and it was. I heard the story that Bubbles or Mike Smith, the character Bubbles, he was just like on set fucking around and doing this character with the glasses and speaking the voice like
Just
that.
some weirdo who was
Hey,
just like,
fucking Ricky. No, I heard he was a boom operator, like a sound boom operator,
wow.
or he was on the crew, some crew job he had, and then it was just like incorporated into it or something, and then they just threw him in the mix with these two.
he looked
wannabe
like
criminal.
He looked like he'd been living in the storage unit with the equipment for the last
Yeah, you know
decade.
what I'm saying? Yeah.
He looked like he had never seen them.
Like he's the one who's went through the transition of lugging old VTR cameras around, and now is, you know,
is like a celebrity. Yeah,
but those guys are major celebrities,
they are. Yeah,
icons.
It was a big show for sure.
They're bigger than Bob and Doug McKenzie, for
Yeah.
the old viewers that can remember that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like they're huge. Like they're international stars, and they didn't make anything prior to that. So let's talk about that. Something like that, where like the owner basically started. He probably started his own idea. That was his own idea with those actors, the two, and then it blew up, and he probably had all the rights going into it.
Assuming he was the only person who.
Well, if he wrote the characters,
Yeah, but
then
the script.
and the script, but if he wrote the characters and character development, would he have full control of the rights to those characters? But I guess the argument is like those guys kind of developed those characters as they went along as actors.
Yeah, they did. I mean, yeah, but I mean, if we're talking about, you're talking about, like, can they copyright them? And
like
them?
yeah.
No, so I mean, you get a copyright in. Well, it depends what it is. You get a copyright in a work. That's the thing that is subject to a copyright.
Yeah.
Right? A work, and a work can be anything that's a product of creativity. But I mean, if you just came up with the characters, you'd have a copyright, I guess, in like if it was a. And these aren't animated characters either. These are like real life characters. Like you're writing it down.
Yeah.
So you can come up with it, but what's the work? Like you have a work in like the paragraph
frame of
you
how
wrote
the
out.
character acts, like not even.
No, you would literally just have a copyright in what you wrote down.
Yeah.
Like as like a you wrote
an outline,
like a 1-page essay that's like saying here's this character and here's what he does. You have a copyright in that.
So the actor more develops that character into what it becomes.
Well, you write the script then, right?
Yeah.
Then I think the script is the central.
But
copyright.
that show's different because I find that it's like I think the writer wrote the situations, and the actors almost kind of ad-libbed a lot of that shit.
So yeah, this gets into like who's the author of a work, right?
Exactly.
Generally speaking, it's like it's who the question that like a judge would ask if you like were suing each other is like, who's the mastermind?
Yeah.
Behind this, right? The
So
famous case over this was actually over Spike Lee's Malcolm X movie.
Yeah.
With Denzel Washington.
Yeah.
There are actually two giant lawsuits that came out of that production, but one of them was Spike Lee was like wanted to make this movie about Malcolm X, and he was looking to talk to people who were experts in like the black activist movement in the 1960s in America, specifically like the Nation of Islam and the Brotherhood of Islam and all that stuff. So they talked to this guy, and like this guy spent a lot of time with Spike Lee, like explaining to them all this stuff, and later wanted to claim partial copyright to the movie because he's like, this came out of my ideas. Like I shaped this whole thing for you. It was my knowledge you used to write it. And the court said, no, you're not like Spike Lee is the mastermind behind shaping this as a work, the film. It's
into a body of work.
Into a body of work. The person who shapes it.
Yeah.
You can tell someone about things, and you can sort of.
It takes a skill to interpret it onto
the
screen.
actual act of because one of the requirements to something to be a work, and it's usually the requirement that people just kind of skim over because they assume it is fixation. The thing has to
Yeah.
be fixed in some kind of a form.
Yeah.
So putting, editing together a film, that's fixation because you fixed it. But if you just like come up with a character on paper, I mean, where's the fixation? Like what's the final product? There's not really a
Yeah.
product there, right?
Yeah.
You need to create a product to really have a copyright.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it's a very fragmentary copyright and something very small.
So now
like just
they're
like a bunch of words on a paper, right?
So my impression, I don't know, viewers tell me if I'm wrong, but I'm under the impression that Clattenburg had rights to this idea of Trailer Park Boys and he owned it all, and he must have signed all the actors into season contracts or X amount of season contracts or certain amount of projects.
Sure, and you can have a copyright and a concept, like that's a more recent thing in copyright, but you get them, but it's just a little more difficult with a concept than with an actual final product.
So the three
as long as it's still at a conceptual stage, you're in this danger zone where because once you go out and make one episode of Trailer Park Boys, now you've fixated the idea. You've taken it from a concept to an actual series, and now if someone tries to copy it, now if someone tries to do something like Trailer Park Boys, it's very clearly infringing because it's obviously a ripoff of something that already exists also as a TV show. If you're just sitting on it at home or you're in the studio developing it, you haven't really put it out there and you haven't put it in its final form. So it's hard. It can be difficult to claim copyright in that case.
They've long since removed themselves from the original creator of the show, and they seem to have full control of these three characters. And they're incorporating it into everything. Like they're involved with Snoop Dogg, Willie Nelson, and various products and stuff like that. So it is almost like they have full creative control of these. I don't know if it's just the characters and the show, or they probably bought the name of the show and the claim. I don't
know. I mean, they certainly have a copyright in their own person. Who they are. You can't take that away from someone.
Yeah.
Right? Like you can these guys often really sort of famous star actors will sort of be famous for who they are.
Robin Williams.
As people.
Yeah.
Not even as a character, as people.
Yeah.
But, that's a choice they make. Because they can afford to say, no, I'm not, I am who I am, and I can afford to go and make a movie. But these guys maybe are more like, look, this is something good we've got. We've got this great show that was a big success, and we're actors. So we're going to some extent, be these characters that we played when we appear in public. Or when we collaborate with other people, we will do them in character as the Trailer Park Boys. Even if it's who they are, they're in some way, they are aware that they're assuming a certain type of character when they're appearing with other people. And they're not violating any copyright doing that because they're actors choosing to act.
Well,
right?
I'm just thinking, I'm thinking more now they're getting more money personally.
Sure.
By doing personal,
but they're doing
appearances and cameos. Sure. and involved in other projects.
But then that's a completely original thing they're doing because they're showing up, they're interacting in a whole new way in a new show and a new set of characters. Yeah. And in that sense, they're creating a new work,
a brand. They're basically the three of them as characters, and with Leahy's since passed.
Sure, but
Randy,
the actual thing, copyrighted thing, like they're not going on and doing scene readings from an existing episode. No, right, rereading things. They're reacting to new situations.
They're just reacting to their environment as the characters.
And there's no, you that's not fixation, right? You haven't. Like there's back in the 90s, I think bunch of football teams, I think in Canada, in the CFL, tried to copyright sports games. They tried to actually say the actual playing, especially in football with the execution of a play. What? They're trying to say a play is copyrighted. It's a specific thing. It's a work. Yeah, they're trying to say that because they wanted to be able to control who could broadcast it. Because if they could get a copyright in the football game, then they could authorize one broadcaster to film it. Anyone else who filmed that game would technically be committing copyright infringement.
Holy shit.
Because they'd be filming a copyrighted thing without permission.
Well, they need extra press to be there anyways,
right? They tried to get it in because one of the things that can be copyrighted is works of choreography. right? Like dance.
Which football basically is.
It's intended. The law is intended for dance.
Get
for dance
the fuck
troops.
out.
So you're a dance choreographer. You're entitled to a copyright if you create a work of dance choreography.
Well, I worked on that.
They were trying to say football's like choreography, and they said no. I think it went to the Supreme Court. But they said no. Because
choreography is something pre-planned and rehearsed,
and each time you
and
do
executed
it is the same time each time.
Same time,
and
but football is not the same outcome.
Any sports game, the whole point, the primary characteristic of a sports game is you don't know the outcome, how it's going to end. Yeah. So there's no way you can't copyright it because it's not fixed, right?
Yeah, exactly.
You don't know how it's going to end.
Yeah.
How can you say it's a fixed work if it's different every time it's shown?
Exactly.
Anything that has an element of, so that makes it difficult to say copyright improv theater, right? Or
because if you're
any kind of improvised performance art where it's like
never the same.
It's never the same, right? And you could say this is an original concept. You can copyright, but it's very difficult for performance artists. And I don't mean like bands. I mean like Yoko Ono, like artists who use a performance as an art piece.
Performance persona as their be all end, like Courtney Love or like
like Yoko Ono or like Maria Abramovich, like people who will go lie on a table in a museum and like the exhibit is you walk in, like very New Yorky stuff, where you like walk into like an art gallery and someone's lying on a table for 6 hours a day and you stand and you look at them.
That's the exhibit.
Yeah, and that's the exhibit. So that can be hard stuff to copyright because you're like, it's this very fleeting thing where it's like.
So I got another one for you too. Master P.
Mm-hmm.
He had this slogan with his music. He would go, make him say,
Mm-hmm.
So he wanted some sort of trademark on that expression, or if you do it like that in a song, if you ever have like an interlude or a transition in a song where you're going, like that specific way,
that's pretty ridiculous.
Has some sort of copyright or
trademark. I mean it would presumably be a copyright because he's trying to say that's a work.
He's trying to say it's my signature sound. Mm-hmm. Really.
Yeah, but those are two different things. Because if you say it's a copyright, you're saying it's my work of art.
Yeah, like, that's what he's saying.
Like my going is somehow a work of art.
It's ridiculous.
That is, but you have to prove that it's original. And so another requirement, we were talking about fixation for a copyright. Another requirement is originality.
Yeah.
Right? So it has to be original. I don't know if that would qualify as being original, but it would be. But it wouldn't. It would only be a trademark if he wanted to coin it that sound in relation to something else. It has to be in relation to
his music,
an album, or in relation to products he endorses. Like
I think it was specifically targeted.
Chips
it was like specifically targeted at other artists doing the same thing.
But then you have to say that, like, if you heard you'd be like, oh, that's a masterpiece. It's hard to, but it's usually supposed to be trademarked in relation to a service. It's trademark. The purpose of a trademark is to identify the origin of something.
Yeah.
So it has to be. It would have to be like it can't be just on the album. The trademark. It would have to be like a little. Like those little things in cards where you open up a card and a little thing plays.
Yeah.
So you can technically trademark sounds. It would have to be a sound that tells you this is a Master P album. So like if he sold a CD and there were a little button on the front and you pressed it and it made that sound, and it was like, this is that Master P album that has like a weird sound as the name of the album. So you could trademark it in relation to that because it's performing the function of telling the customer this is an album by Master P.
Do you know
you wouldn't, in terms of, I think what he's trying to do is copyright it. And I don't think
ridiculousness. He was he tried out for the Raptors, back in the day.
He's like the only, and he made it to like the farm team or something.
Yeah, he made it to the farm team for the Charlotte Hornets.
Yeah, I heard that he's the
Toronto Raptors.
He's the only rapper who actually
made it that far
into the NBA.
Yeah,
the guy who was like an actual full-time album producing rapper.
He released a diamond album every month for an entire year in the States.
Diamond's like 10 million, right?
Yeah.
That's crazy.
That's fucking insane.
Yeah.
And Jimmy Iovine from Interscope offered him $1 million, and he says, if I'm worth $1 million, if they want to offer me $1 million, I'm worth 10.
Yeah.
And he saved it, and he just like promoted all these other artists and blew up. I don't know. It just like the South blew up or something, and then
he was definitely in the right place at the right time, like right when Southern rap suddenly.
There's another artist I really enjoy, Too Short, who had that luck to or intuition maybe had, where he was in Oakland and he was sick and tired of like people dying around him, and he's just like, I'm gonna go to Atlanta where it's super cheap and I can get a mansion, and all this new rap is starting up and it's blowing up.
Yeah, and that's right when
Outkast just starts coming out. And yeah, so let's get back to what we were talking about before the break. The case you sat in for.
Yeah. So like I was saying, I'm here as a student intern, right?
Yep.
And it's a cool experience because it's this program at Osgood, which is the law school I go to, and they have this program called the Intellectual Property Law and Technology Intensive Program.
What's the acronym for that?
They just call it IP Osgood.
IP Osgood.
IP Osgood. IP Osgood is the organization which my prof, who I do research work for as well, she's like a leading sort of copyright scholar in Canada. She's really cool. She started this thing called IP Osgood 10 years ago. They just celebrated their 10-year anniversary. So it's like this. It's probably the strongest like IP law program in Canada. So when I was applying to law schools, I knew about this. I was doing research, and I knew I wanted to do IP law. So I remember like going to interview at Osgood. Probably shortly. Actually, no, I'd already met you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember because I met you in 2015.
Yeah.
This was in 2016. So I remember like I was applying to things, and I got a call from Osgood. They wanted to interview me, so I went up there. And I was waiting for a while in the main office, and they've got all these like things for all these programs and all these law programs. They had a thing for the IP intensive, and I picked it up and I looked at it. And I was like, oh, holy shit! Like, SOCAN, Canadian Heritage, Globe and Mail, like all of these places that you could work while you're there. So I'm like, if I'm gonna go to law school, like, it'd be great if I could do this. So, years go by. I'm finally in my final year, and I get into the program, which is what brought me to Ottawa. So it's cool. It's like, it sucks that I'm apart from my girlfriend and I have to rent basically a second apartment while I'm here for 2 months. But I do get to be somewhere that I know years ago I'd set this goal to be like, I want to do this, and now here I am, I'm doing it. So that's a good experience. But one of the things is, if you're going to move to Ottawa for 2 months, you're going to work, you should try and go to the Supreme Court. Like, it's a good experience. So I wanted to go, and I was hoping that something IP related would be in court. And there's something involving Bell in December that is actually an IP matter, but it's after I leave. So the closest sort of case to what I was interested in was this case against TELUS. It's called TELUS versus Wellman, and I think that it's mid-November now. The decision probably will be sometime in the new year. It'll come out, but it was a class action. It was appeal on a class action. So it's a very
is it an individual Wellman?
So the way these it's part of a class action. So Abraham Wellman is one of the people who's involved in the class action. For whatever reason, they put his name on the actual factum, right?
Oh,
so generally,
so
when there's a big group of people, one of them is basically appointed. It's like when you're on a jury and you appoint appoint like a foreman for the jury, right? Someone's just got to speak.
I always thought it was
collective.
Against an individual.
Well, it could be. It could be just one guy named Wellman sued
Johnson
TELUS
versus Johnson, or
sure. But if it's a class action, generally the rule under class action is appoint one person to they don't have to be a leader. They just have to be the name. They'll put their name on the thing, and you actually go through the full file of the lawsuit. There will be an area in the file that will list all the people.
Okay,
for sure. It's just like you can't list them all in the front. That's obviously ridiculous, because at least can involve hundreds of thousands of people. So the case I saw, for many years, TELUS billed their customers on a per second basis, as they were saying. So
Yeah.
it was like as soon as you hung up, they stopped billing you. Then they switched to per minute billing. And basically if your call was under 30 seconds, they would bill you for
5.
No, for the amount. But as soon as you went over 30 seconds, and if you hung up at say 40 seconds, they'd round up. They'd bill you for a minute, right?
Minute.
And if it was a minute and a
I
half,
remember
they'd round you up to 2, right?
bills and bills like that.
Yeah. So they switched to that at some point in the early 2000s, and they didn't tell anybody. They didn't update their terms of service. They just started rounding up.
Cocksuckers.
Didn't tell you. So that went on for years, and then finally, someone TELUS spotted this, or I don't know if there was a change in the executive level, but basically, probably an in-house lawyer was like, "You have to tell people you're doing this. Like you're gonna get sued your ass off." So TELUS updated their terms of service, said, "Okay, we're per second billing now." Then people started looking into it, like, "Oh wait, you've been doing this for a long time, right?" So that was the basis of the class action. So thing is, and this is common with most services, with any kind of a large corporate service, there's a term in the contract you have with TELUS and most phone companies that says, if you have a problem with your service, you have an issue with us, you agree to resolve it through private arbitration.
Whoa.
Right? Arbitration clause.
Yeah.
Yeah, credit card companies have them, cell phone, internet, any kind of company that's providing you with some kind of an
service,
ongoing monthly
service. Yeah.
Yeah, there's always going to be that thing now.
Gyms.
Sure, yeah. I'm sure Good Life probably does that because if they're big enough, they'll put that in their contract because they're concerned if they have too many claims at once, people can they don't want that. So private arbitration, and generally there's these things called choice of forum clause or something, which is the clause that says who gets to decide where it happens. So often like forum selection clause. So like Facebook, for example, says, if you've got a problem, you have to come to California to litigate against us.
Motherfuckers.
So you have to go to California, get a lawyer in California, go to court in California, like go through that whole process.
Assholes.
So all these things come through, and they'll. But in Ontario, at least, and I think most provinces have this, there's this thing called a Consumer Protection Act, right? And it says that to the extent that it's a consumer, right, like just you and me, individuals, just we're not part of a business, we're just like doing business with TELUS just as a personal subscriber. To the extent that we have a claim against them, just as individuals, we're entitled to take them to court. Right, that's consumer protection. Right, that's saying like the companies are too powerful, and we as individuals have no power. So you can't force us into this ridiculous situation where it's private arbitration. They're selecting everything. Like that's not real justice, right?
You're allowed to bring up scrutiny, and use it against them.
Well, the overall goal is justice, right? And they're realizing that to the extent that there are these private arbitration clauses between companies and individuals,
control, abuse of power,
there will be no justice in that situation. So we create the Consumer Protection Act to achieve that, right?
So I knew I was crazy, and I always been crazy, but I would calculate because I've been a TELUS customer for fucking 2003.
Yeah,
and I would look at some of the bills, and I knew they round these things up.
So you'll be able to. You can be part of this class action. Like you don't have to do anything right now. The way these things work is a group of people get together and everyone. Yeah. But once there's a settlement, and there will be, and I'll keep going on about this because this is a very complicated case.
No, it's a great case.
But there will at some point there will be a settlement on this.
Yeah.
And then they'll probably send out a mass email to like everyone who's ever a customer, and they'll be like, were you a TELUS customer between these dates? If so, you get $60, right? Because that's your share of the class action settlement. Right?
If you took this pill that went astray for 10 years, you may be entitled to a settlement.
You may be entitled to exactly. Yeah. So that's how these class actions work, right? If you satisfy these criteria, you can prove it. Then like that, they've had to pay out, a $50 million settlement, and all this huge group of people get to a share of that, right?
Is this a groundbreaking case as far as like telecommunications are concerned, and or like business on the internet, or providing a service like that in general?
No. So I was hoping that there would be an IP related case around something like that.
Yeah.
But they don't come along very often. At the Supreme Court. Like IP is a very specific thing. So this involves a telecom, but it's really it's a class action suit.
Which there have been millions.
Which is interesting, and it's an ongoing area because it's a very contentious area.
Yeah.
Because what it's really about is what are the rights in a class action and what are the rights to private arbitration, right? So like I was saying, there's this thing called the Consumer Protection Act that exists. But it doesn't protect businesses, right? It only protects people who are consumers.
Oh.
Now, I think it was something like 1.5 million people were affected by this practice of rounding up, right? We're overcharged. 1.5 million people. Of that group, 600,000 are businesses, and 900,000, a million are private consumers. So TELUS basically is now and this started in 2013, 2014. This has been going on for like 5 years over, right? And TELUS's position is we understand that all of our consumers are entitled to a settlement, or at least we're prepared to go through with a class action suit against them. But what we don't acknowledge is whether the businesses are entitled to be enjoined to that class action and also be recipients of a payout, right? Because these 600,000 businesses, and the Consumer Protection Act only protects consumers, not businesses.
Yeah.
So the question is...
which is a lot more money if you involve the businesses.
Well, it's just more people. Like the businesses everyone will get an equal payout.
Yeah.
They'll all be in one class. Like when you have a class action, you're part of a class of people, right? Meaning a specific group.
Yeah.
And everyone in that class gets an equal share, whether they're a business or a consumer. It's just It's just that the damage award will be higher because they'll know it has to be divided amongst a certain number of people.
Copy.
So there's this question of, to what extent, if you're a business, and most of these businesses, it's not ringing. It's
a text.
It's not a text. It's like my phone stops charging and starts recharging.
Oh, okay. Anyway, sorry to cut you off.
So businesses aren't protected by consumer protection, right? They're expected to, and generally, TELUS's argument is businesses are expected to enter into agreements aware of their terms, right? If you're a business owner, you should always read the terms, right? That's kind of an assumption.
Even if they're 20 pages.
Yeah, and even if it's a contract of adhesion, right?
Yeah.
Which is the terms of service of, say, a cell phone contract where you don't get to negotiate it. There's no back and forth. There's no haggling with TELUS over
this is what you get.
This is what you get. Contract of adhesion. So generally, courts say where it's that kind of a contract, we're going to be far more favorable to the claimant, the individual who was forced to accept these terms if he wanted the product.
They need it. It's a service. It's almost like
exactly. So, and a lot of these businesses are very small businesses, right? Mom and pop shops, convenience stores, buying Wi-Fi, whatever, right?
Yeah.
So their case is we should be treated the same as individuals because we're tiny businesses and this is TELUS, right?
Yeah.
And then, as the businesses get bigger and bigger and bigger, presumably there's supposed to be some kind of line you cross. Where like, okay, now you're a big enough business. And this was TELUS's point.
Yeah.
Like, you're buying 6,000 cell phone plans for all
Our
your
multi-million-dollar company still called David and Son.
Yeah. So you get to a certain point where like you're negotiating with a VP at TELUS for like a massive package for your entire company, right? It's a lucrative deal, and your lawyer and their lawyer sit down. Now, obviously, in that case, if there's an arbitration clause, you're going to have to honor it. The court isn't going to hear it because they're like, you had professional lawyers sitting down, you knew about this.
You promised.
Contract law, it's a very strong argument. But when you're running, Kim's Convenience, and that kind of a business, right?
Mm-hmm.
Something like that, a small business. In that case, aren't you more like the person who, got screwed over by, the rounding up?
Yeah,
and you
don't
don't
really get affected as a more of a person who's living day by day.
So that's the situation, and this is how specific these cases that go with the Supreme Court get. There's one section in the Ontario Arbitrations Act. It's like Section 5, subsection 3 or something. And all it says is that the court may, and the legislation uses may or shall. May. Shall means mandatory, may means optional.
Yeah.
So the court when the Arbitration Act says, where there is an issue before arbitration, but it's part of a bigger claim that's like a class action before a court, the court may split the action apart. It may split it and may continue with the elements that are not subject to arbitration and send the matters that are subject to arbitration there.
Wow.
But may means that the court could refuse. All's well. The court could say no. It's optional.
So vague.
So court could say no, and court could say no. If we split the matter apart, that sort of damages the cases and it messes everything up. So we're going to keep it as one single case, and that's when you say the issues all sort of depend on each other. And if you send the issues off to another court, then you don't have the whole full picture, right? So that kind of thing.
And it doesn't work to convince them.
Yeah, and that's what Supreme Court, in the U.S. or in Canada or anywhere else, these are the kind of things. They have to deal with these very specific things where it's like the law is vague and there's no judgment on this. And basically we need the Supreme Court to read it and analyze it and make a decision. And their decision will basically fill the gaps in the law, and that will become law.
What's coming.
Yeah, so what the 9 judges say by majority will basically become law, like very firm law that could only be overcome if the House of Commons votes to change the law.
So the biggest thing is the discrepancy of what is a company and what's still an individual. Like, what's that line?
That's part of the analysis. Yeah, but the overlying question is this very specific thing about this one sentence in an act about what is the extent of the courts. How does the court decide when they will sever a claim? And when they sever, it means that the issues over, the billing and whatever else there is, go to arbitration. And any other issues you have to tell us that aren't part of that, you can proceed with the class action on. And the fewer claims you have, the lower their payout will be, right? Mm. And if you can't enjoin businesses, then obviously lower payout because fewer people. So they're just trying to make sure they pay the least amount of money they can. It's all about money in the end, right? But
exactly, it's all about a business.
They're just trying to avoid. They're trying to pay out $5 million instead of 15 million, right?
Well, it's also they own a monopoly on a certain technology. There's only a couple of companies that have this right to.
Well, the infrastructure.
The infrastructure,
that's
exactly.
The thing, right? Everyone's got technology, but the.
Well, there's
owning
been several
all the cell towers, right? And
there's been several companies that have come along that have done well, and they've been eaten up by the big guys because they have to ride on their infrastructure.
Yeah, and I think Freedom got bought by Shaw.
Yeah,
but there's not
Fido
a lot.
got bought by Rogers.
Yeah, but there's not a lot left now to buy. Like all of the big telecoms pretty much have bought up. I mean, I guess they can keep buying.
The Wild West is done.
There's
for
also
that. The Wild West is all eaten up for that, pretty much.
There's Videotron in Quebec.
Yeah,
they're relatively recent, but the Quebec, I think, market. There's a lot of companies that just don't operate there.
Well, Rogers scooped up everything.
Yeah.
Is it dying or is it just? Oh.
No, it's
Well, thanks for all that, filling us in with that. Information and
yeah, man. I mean,
it all ties into what's happening too with copyright laws for artists online and
I swear I'm interested in other things, but this is just this. I can talk about this all day because this is just
I find it fascinating. It's so fascinating. I deal with
day in day out. This is like my life for the last year at least in school.
Well, I love it because it's I'm fascinated more of what I can and can't say in the future and coming.
Yeah, and
days to come, And it's just a changing landscape because the digital age and of everything being consumed online as business now. And who owns what and where are those lines drawn, and it's almost where's another class action that was coming around for SoundCloud and things like Spotify, artists getting their proper share and stuff like that. And
I mean, are you saying? I mean, I hear you that companies come in and they take over spaces, but they often also fail too, right? And then they. I think there's lots of like people speaking their minds all over the internet and every single place. Like it's deafening now. Like everyone's got a mouthpiece to talk, right? But they kind of cancel each other out that way.
Exactly.
But I don't know. I don't ascribe to the whole doom and gloom thing. I mean, I think there's
I don't.
I think there's I think there's a lot of negative things that have been done with social media lately, and negative stories coming out. But the fact that the negative stories come out and people are uncovered. I mean, there's a great article, like a deep investigation in Facebook just this week by the New York Times that showed the extent to which Facebook has been hiring all of these lobbyists in Washington to try and escape getting in massive trouble, and each step they take to try to escape it, the more trouble they get in, and they're in so much trouble now. Not just for how their platform was taken over by, the Russians, but also how they just try to evade responsibility for it for the last 2 years. Like they're in trouble for that as well. So I mean, you see really powerful organizations like that own content online, and then you see them just getting torn down like before your eyes when they fuck up.
Well, yeah, because it's like at the end of the day, they don't have the power.
They don't, yeah, and I think in the digital age, people can.
The digital age is going so far and fast beyond the people that do have the power and the control.
Yeah, well, it's true, and it kind of in some ways it holds you to this higher standard. Not that people are behaving by it, but like.
Well, it's keeping people in check in a way now.
But if you do bad shit, like people will find out.
Yeah.
Like and it's weird. In business versus politics, it's different. Like if your behavior as an executive comes up, like you're done. Like the shareholders are going to get rid of you. But in politics, it's different because it's the electorate that will decide to get rid of you. They may actually they're not informed economically the way, say, a corporate board is.
Well, I think that's the good thing where it's becoming, transparent with. It's almost making running for any individual government transparent because they can look at your history.
All your secrets will come out some
right away. You know what I mean?
The problem is that some politicians can basically own their bad behavior in a way that gets them more support. This is populism.
Exactly.
Where it's like, I did shoot at my wife. Yeah, big deal. And we'll go, well, look at his confidence.
He's real.
Something like that. He's real. Yeah, that kind of thing, right? Slavoj Žižek has a great.
Well, that's also like the infatuation with celebrityism, no matter what.
Sure.
At all costs, like any press is good press in a way.
There's that argument. I mean, there's an interesting quote from Slavoj Žižek where he says there's a big difference between the kind of country that will like torture people but deny it, and then crossing that line to a country that tortures people and admits it,
celebrates it.
So, just says we do it. There's a big difference between that, right?
Yeah.
Like there might be no difference objectively what you're doing either way, but if you're denying it, there's at least some moral part in your brain that knows this isn't what things are supposed to be like.
Like Saudi Arabia.
There's some kind of a hope that actually we're better than this. Whereas if you just admit that you're just torturing people, then that's saying like, what do you you're basically saying we've already arrived at what we desire to be. We've achieved what we want,
like
which is a state that tortures people.
The weird story with this journalist from Turkey.
The Khashoggi killing. And that's weird because like Saudi Arabia has so pathetically tried to cover it up, and just one
the
story
whole world
after
knows
another,
that they just murder journalists left, right, and center.
And now, but they'll do anything to save face. To
I don't know what it's for. Is it their own fucking people or their own? From the Stop and Uprising,
Yeah, I think the Saudis are very paranoid about uprisings. There's been articles for years.
There's so many more youth that are getting enlightened in that country.
Everyone's on Twitter in Saudi Arabia. Like people are on the internet in Saudi Arabia everywhere, and everyone talks.
Yeah.
And the government just wants to kind of pretend it's not happening.
Nothing's going on.
I think the Saudi royal family is terrified of what could happen to them and their grip on power.
Yeah.
But I think they're terrified with the drop in oil prices and how the U.S. is now the biggest oil producer in the world.
Yeah.
With fracking. I think when the U.S. did that, when they suddenly, remember it was
Obama scratched
remember
all
2014
that.
when
Obama switched the flip, like he.
Yeah, the fracking.
Yeah.
Yeah, there was like a month or two in 2014.
North Dakota, they went buck wild in North Dakota.
Yeah. There was sometime in 2014, suddenly oil prices just plummeted.
Yeah.
If you remember that.
Well, also ours.
I remember I was just
people
starting
stopped buying our shit too. People stopped buying our crude oil that cost 2 times as much to produce.
Yeah, but I remember I was working at TD Bank at the time, and I remember the financial markets after that drop in. When the oil price dropped, suddenly the markets dropped too, because suddenly oil got cheaper. And at first, the markets dropped because everyone freaked out. Everyone was like, what the hell's going on? We don't do. So the price was going down. There was this big dip, and then just it took off because suddenly it was like, like everything's cheaper now. Like it's cheaper to ship things.
Everything.
Cheaper to do things, yeah. And it was a big thing. Like but like the oil prices were really impacted by that. And I think it freaked out Saudi Arabia and it freaked out Russia at the time because they were like, we don't control the oil price anymore.
Well, Russia runs,
and I think
can dictate their price for Europe.
Yeah, to a large extent. But I think they are threatened by how effective the U.S. is at producing oil, and I think that that it's after 2014-15 when that happened that you started to see Russia interfering in the U.S. elections.
Yeah.
And I wonder if it's part of that. I wonder if Russia was really
it's
freaked out. It's like, how do we deal with America now beating us at oil production? Because that was something that they were always buying, and now they're starting to sell.
That's what they had. Well, because there's not
many.
There's also not many countries that are not controlled by the World Bank. Like Russia's one of them. And Russia has almost everything they need, right? They
get funding from the World Bank. They get loans.
Yeah,
Yeah, but what could the World Bank ever do if Russia didn't want to repay those loans?
Exactly.
So I wouldn't say Russia is controlled by the World Bank. I'd say Russia gets money from them.
No, I'm saying World Bank is one of the countries that not controlled by them.
Yeah.
They have nothing over Russia. Can stand on their own.
Sure. It's the really weak countries that need the funding from the World Bank that need to answer to like their policies and everything. Yeah, sure.
So, very informative podcast. Thanks for being a part of it.
No problem, man. Thanks for talking.
Yeah, we'll do another one later. And we're just hanging out here in Ottawa, having a good time.
Very peaceful.
Very peaceful.
Quiet house.
We had some escargot tonight.
Yeah, that was good.
Which is fantastic. We're going to wrap it up here. My buddy Roger Angus, extraordinaire. Keyboard, guitar. Lawman. All right, buddy. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks, man.
All right. Good night, folks. One-way ticket on an Astro plane. I close my eyes on a gamma ray. One-way ticket on an Astro plane. I close my eyes on a gamma ray. Never stop believing, never stop achieving. In my mind I will and conceive it. My mouth I use as a weapon. AK-47, the truth I selected. The root of the proof has been served and neglected. Served to produce is objected. Tethered to harassment, the youth is investment. Arrested, sentenced to victimless crimes. Dumbed down lectures of masses. Crash and burn, Saturn apparatus. Use the earth as a trash bin. Bruises and brains collecting slave acid sins. Ruled in distress and successions. News fooled, fuels an abusive progression. Flooding the mind with productions uniform. State of line. Take me away. Take me away. One-way ticket on an astro plane. I close my eyes on a gamma ray. One-way ticket on an astro plane. I close my eyes on a gamma ray. Objects floating in space. Hubble's bubbles been replaced. Convex convolutions. Contours, concours of illusions. I double my vision. Plain sight, right through the prisms. Turning shapes into bridges, waters through the vision. My mind's on a mission. Since the beginning of time, precious metals, minute man's mind. Prosperous nation prevails on a moonwalk, on the minute clock. Rapid like aluminum foil, to the victor goes the spoil. Wrapped to keep the coil, surprise you like Susan Boyle.